Okay, if I could welcome people, and we have a fair amount of business to get through, and we have a number of requests to speak during the meeting as well. So Councillor Gold's asking to speak on one item. There's an exempt item on the agenda, and I'm hoping that on item 5.2, I'm hoping you can deal with that matter on the open agenda, but if people want to delve into the pink stuff, then we'll have to take that later on, excluding the press and public. We've had 2 requests to speak at the meeting, or 3 actually. One is on the education partnership, where Kat Smith, head teacher at Bow School, may well help form part of the presentation. And we have 2 public requests to speak. The first is on item 5 for Housing Policy and Affordability Commission, where we have a speaker from the Townlets Federation of Tenants and Residents Associations. Is Mark Taylor here? Okay. And the other is an ad hoc and unexpected pleasure, an addition to the meeting, which is so Brenda Daly and Ian Watkins are here and would like to speak to the Cabinet briefly about the Ocean Warden Service. Now, the position on that is that there's nothing on the agenda for this. They expressed frustration that it's apparently proved difficult to meet me, that they have a meeting with Councillor Cyril Islam at the end of May. I'm disappointed because I'm aware that they wanted to meet me for some time, but I'm always happy to meet people. But if we could agree before we start the formal business of the meeting, then that we'd invite Brenda and Ian to approach the table and speak for up to 5 minutes between them. They then love us to ask them questions, but it might make sense to have a separate meeting because there is no decision on tonight's agenda about the warden service on the Ocean Estate that I'm aware of. Is that, well, actually, since I'm an executive mayor, I have all the votes in the room, so I can just say yes to myself, and we can invite Brenda and Ian to approach the table. There's a couple of chairs there, if you could. And I think I'm right in saying that virtually everyone else in the room is from the Ocean Estate, in the public gallery, and are anxious about this service. So over to you, Brenda and Ian.
Okay, thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to speak to you this evening. My name's Brenda Daly. I'm chair of the Ocean Estate Tenants Association, but I'm also chair of a small group called the Resident Warden Forum, which Ian is also part of. And we've been told that the Warden Service is going to close down at the end of June, and we'd like to put our case forward as to what this impact would have on the elderly people that we take care of. So Ian's going to just say a few words so you'll know what part of it's about.
Well, as you know now, obviously we're speaking on behalf of the Ocean Estate Resident Wardens Steering Group. I'm Ian Watkins. Thank you. Salvation Army in Stepney. Thank you. So we as a steering group and as a group of residents are obviously gravely concerned about the imminent closure of the Resident Warden Service on Ocean Estate. Our feeling and knowledge is that not only will this put up the overall costs in the borough due to the people that are currently living independently not being able to live independently anymore, we're also very concerned that the Tower Hamlets Homes report that we believe is being used as a basis to close the service has a number of errors and inconsistencies in it, and those mistakes are effectively leading to a wrong conclusion to actually shut the service. So we'd be really grateful if yourself, Mayor, and appropriate officers could meet us before the end of next week so that we can discuss this in a timely way. Or, I know we have a meeting set up, but we're very concerned about the timing of that. If we have to stick to that time, if you could commit to extending the service, to which point we can have a full and complete discussion about the actual inconsistencies and failures that are in this report that we believe are incorrectly leading to the closure of the service. So that is our ask for today.
Okay, well, I'm a pushover, aren't I? I'm agreeable to doing that. Of course I am. Subject to be able to fit something in between now and the end of next week, and I'll bring an officer or two, and my cabinet member Cyril Islam, who's sitting next to me here, can come to that meeting as well. But if I could be at risk of being unhelpful, we have a lot of other business to deal with, and this is not on the agenda tonight. So I know a lot of people have come quite a long way to be here, but we're not really in a position to debate this at length this evening. But I'm happy to bring people to that meeting.
Mr Mayor, can I just say that people who come tonight are they're quite desperate, basically. When we told them the warden service was going to be closed, one of the residents said that she will die if they do not keep him there. She will not be able to get out of her home every day and go to the club. She will not take part where the gardening club is. Our lunch club was stopped due to lack of funding. So they seem to have everything being taken away from them. And, you know, we feel that elderly people are a Cinderella group right now and nobody's taking care of them. And we can't let that happen to our elderly people. We look after our young, but we should also be looking after our elderly.
I'm very clear that for as long as I'm mayor, I don't know how long that will be, elderly people will not be a Cinderella group in this borough. So any suggestion that they are, while I'm the mayor of Tower Hamlets, is, in my view, improper, although you're quite free to challenge me on that, because this is a democracy, and I'm very happy to.
Well, we thought that because we read in East End Life last year when you took over that the priority was elderly.
But anyway, we're not here to play at politics, are we, Brenda? So I'm very happy to come to a meeting between now and the end of next week, and can I apologise to people who've been brought to this meeting in the expectation we'll have a long debate about this, because we can't really have that today, but I'm happy to come to a meeting.
We can appreciate that. We just wanted your time and we wanted people to know that we are still trying to fight for this.
Now, Councillor Islam is going to...
Sorry, people knew that we would just be able to ask a short question, but they felt so strongly about the issue that they didn't want to make
I appreciate that that's what you're saying, and I appreciate that people have made an effort to come here this evening. It would have been helpful if you had given prior notice and if we had been able to arrange a meeting. I know a request came in a while ago and I'm very happy to attend a meeting. Councillor Islam wants to add something which is not intended to extend the debate.
I just wanted to say very quickly, Mayor, Councillor Allam and Councillor Asmir did bring this issue to attention. I think early this year, it's not the lack of trying, but we have tried to fix dates for this meeting. We tried to fix a walkabout as well early this year, but I think diary clashes, your ward councillors, one could make it, the other couldn't. We tried to fix a meeting earlier than end of this month. Again, we had a problem. I think, Brenda, your diary was difficult, and this is why the meeting is fixed. But if we can find a date that everyone can make it before, this week or early next week, we're very pleased to do that and talk to you.
Okay, that's good. All right, we appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
If we could turn the thing off. And I certainly haven't made a decision to close the service. It's not a decision that would normally come to me as mayor. But let's talk about it when we meet. Okay, thanks. Now, people are very welcome to stay. If you... Okay, sure. But thanks very much. If I could apologise to people for not being able to deal with that item as comprehensively as you might have hoped, but I will come to a meeting and we'll talk about it then. If I could move on and welcome people to the meeting. And members of the public will be aware of the procedure. The meetings are filmed, although ordinarily the film doesn't include members of the public. It's these strange things in the ceiling. And do we have any apologies? We have an apology from Steve Halsey, for whom Roy Ormsby is here. And Roy Ormsby, for those who haven't met him before, is our new service head for Public Realm and has been here for about a week, so it'll be a great joy for you to see how our cabinet works in Tower Hamlets. Okay.
I'm 71, 72, so no one cares.
I don't think there's any indication that no one in this room cares about you. I wasn't aware that... Has something happened that I meant to have reacted to? No? We had a request to speak from 2 members of the public, and we have an upset member of the public who has now left. Okay. We'll have that meeting. So thank you. Welcome, Mr. Ormsby. Do I need to address the adoring masses present? Not really. No, I don't think. We have the annual council meeting next week. Don't think I have any particular announcements we need to make today. If we can move on, declarations. Do members have any declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests? I take that as not. Are we happy to agree the unrestricted minutes of the 5th of April? Yep. Well, I think that's for me to agree, isn't it? No one disputes them. There seem to be a record of what happened. Yep. Item 4, overview and scrutiny. So over to you as Chair of ONS, Councillor Pearce. I'm aware there are no pre-scrutiny questions, but you may want to address us for up to 10 minutes, but it may not need all that time.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At last night's overview and scrutiny, we received the committee's final report on Poplar Town Hall. And the committee, I'm glad to say, agreed the recommendations to ensure that the lessons are learned and that the appropriate checks and balances are in place for future disposals. The committee acknowledged through the discussions that getting the culture right was imperative to this process and to ensure that we get it right. It is now the task of the cross-party working group to take forward the majority of the recommendations and to consider how they can be implemented within the Council. The Overview and Scrutiny Committee also received its annual report, and I think this year has been a busy year for scrutiny. We set the bar high at the start of the year with our Transparency Commission, which I have discussed here on a number of occasions. Just to remind you, there was 3 goals in the Transparency Commission. The first is to enhance the scrutiny function of the Council. The second is to achieve open data access by default. And the final is to become a beacon council for openness and accountability. Not good, but excellent in these terms. I'm delighted that the Council has now achieved the first goal of the Transparency Commission. And last night we set up a housing subcommittee, and so now we have effectively doubled the scrutiny committee function within the Council, which is a huge success and a good step forward in moving Tower for Hamlets forward. The housing subcommittee will exist in the new municipal year and will consist of 7 councillors, and it will enable non-executive councillors to scrutinise housing provision in the borough, the mayor and the executive's strategic decision making, but also the performance of local landlords and registered providers. The report, the annual review, also highlighted the successful in-depth reviews and challenge sessions that we, the Scrutiny Committee, delivered during the year. Into issues such as the prevent duties of the Council, the maternity services, recycling, looking at our policy to ensure that the workforce reflects the community, and the really important and serious decisions that the Council is going to make forward in regards to homelessness and homeless families. Then the committee received Councillor Hassell's report into the services for young people in regards to social, emotional and mental health provision, and the report had 9 recommendations which focus on improving access to education locally for girls, improving data sharing and working in partnership. We also had officers presenting the process of the SEN review, and we had a good round of discussion, and Councillor Saunders was in attendance to sort of lead the discussions with scrutiny members and cooperative members in regards to this. So I think in essence this is the last update from me as the chair of scrutiny for this municipal year. I think it's been a really fun year, challenging year. I think there's a point to make. I would like to thank the Mayor for attending 5 scrutiny sessions. I think we've had a history in Tower Hamlets where I think we were once going to the High Court to ensure that the directly elected Mayor would attend scrutiny, and now we have had a good commitment, and I think the challenge going forward is to bring the public much closer to the scrutiny. We do scrutiny on their behalf. And I think that a really good step in that is the mayoral assemblies that have been set up, and I think they need to continue and progress. So, thanks.
Can I in turn thank you for your work on ONS, and there are few things I enjoy more than attending ONS committees. Well, sometimes you reshuffle the agenda in order to allow Councillor Sharia Khatun to go home, and I would prefer you to shuffle it to allow me to go home, sometimes before 10 o'clock in the evening. But that's fine. And on the basis that imitation is the finest form of flattery, I'm pleased that you have enacted a transparency review because I was elected with such a commitment, and we carried it out as a priority. And I'm delighted also that you have created a housing subcommittee, which was again in my manifesto last year. So I'm a bit worried that you might be captured by the executive, if you like, if you're doing everything that I wanted you to do. So I'm looking forward to you doing things that I don't want you to do, although hopefully in a controlled and manageable fashion. And I'd be delighted to see the Poplar Town Hall report disappear from active play and its recommendations to be considered. Are there any questions from members of the Cabinet? The answer is none. Thank you very much. So there were no call-ins on item 4.2. So we now move on to the main items. So 5.1 is the planning policy explanatory note on tall buildings. And I thought I would just say that I was very, very keen that this be brought here, because we've inherited from the previous administration a predisposition towards quite a presumption in favour of tall buildings in all sorts of parts of the borough. This doesn't alter the fact that in some parts of the borough, notably the place known as the CAS and also the city fringe area, there's an expectation that we will allow tall buildings, but not an infinite number of them. And I know I was advised that Councillor Goals wanted to speak on this item, but I believe that Councillor Wood wants to speak in his stead. Is that right? Now, what's the chronology here? I don't know what's happening there. Do you speak first, or does Rachel Blake speak first? I lose track of these things.
It's usually the cabinet.
Usually, cabinet. You've written your briefing note in the wrong order, then, because I'm not a slavish follower of the briefing note, but it's got them in the wrong order here. So, Rachel Blake.
Mayor, the councillors in the community have expressed.
I'm wrong. Carry on.
Oh wow! Now what should the councillors and community have expressed a concern that the development industry increasingly sees much of the borough as an opportunity for tall buildings. Our current policy position is that we do have specific areas where tall buildings are acceptable, and those are set out within our planning documents and then summarised again within page 4 of the note. The purpose of this note is to summarise the policy position that we have in place and to remind the development industry where our policies are set out and where tall buildings would be particularly appropriate. Planning applications do need to take into account the range of national, regional and local planning policies and guidance. But in recent years, we have seen a surge in development interest in London, which we believe has caused the development industry to see Tower Hamlets as a particular opportunity. The graphic on page 6 of the note, which is on page 28 of the pack, sets out in a bit more detail than is in our actual local plan policy the heights that we believe to be acceptable. And I think it's worth mentioning that district centres, of which Whitechapel is one, should respond to the predominant local context, and that's something that we wanted to be clear from this note. So I'm grateful to the officers for bringing this forward, and I welcome contributions from other members.
Are you here as Councillor Wood, or as Councillor Gold, or as the putative chair of the...
Nobody could repeat Peter Gold's.
Okay, you need to switch your microphone on.
Okay. So what I wanted to say, this is a useful summary of existing policies, and this is an important issue. And obviously in my ward we have a lot of experience of tall buildings, but as the paper itself says, it actually carries of itself no material weight in planning. But we do know there's a continuing flow of tall buildings. I won't list them all, but for example, on Thursday night, we've got a 210-metre tall, 53-storey building in my ward, South Quay Plaza 4, coming forward. And there is a comment in the paper about the local plan will have a policy on tall buildings. And we know the local plan, once you start a public consultation, starts to carry some weight in the planning process. So the question I've got, has there been any consideration given to the local plan actually bringing parts of that local plan forward in terms of the public consultation, starting some of the chapters earlier, because I know it's a big document, a lot of work needs to be done, perhaps starting that public consultation on tall building policy earlier than August in order to start influencing the flow of developments coming through the system.
Sorry. I was just actually looking to Adele to give us some process advice.
We
and
can
then I
ask
could...
Adele Mayer from
Yeah.
Planning to come and speak, and maybe I could say a couple of things as well, which would be that you need to turn your light off. Yeah, apparently, otherwise we get problems. The technology is very primitive here, which would be that currently, of course, last Thursday, Londoners did a delightful thing by electing a new mayor. But the new mayor for London inherits the planning policies of the previous mayor, and the planning policies of Town Council are rather like the layers of an onion superimposed on the planning policies of the Greater London Authority, which have a presumption that the Isle of Dogs Central Activities Zone will be an area of very high density development. And so, although there may be an ability to change that, that would have to form part of the longer term consultation on the local development plan, and it would have to be consistent with the London plan, which is the Mayor of London's document. Obviously, people who may feel that they're suddenly released from the yoke of oppression under the Conservative Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, and will suddenly be able to do all the things that they've dreamt of doing under the Labour Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, may find that the process of plan making means that it's not quite as simple as that. But that was just my political sort of preamble to Adele Mayer, the planning officer, explaining to us, hopefully, how this is actually going to work. Because I think the current presumption is that the Central Activity Zone, which is the area that Andrew is talking about, is an area where... Now, Andrew's about to turn on Adele's microphone, and then Adele will speak.
I was going to say, actually, I'm thinking about the whole borough. I'm not just thinking about...
Okay.
For my ward, it's game over.
Okay.
My ward is going to have lots of tall
it's
buildings.
not. I
I'm
think
more concerned
with
about your
respect-
wards.
With respect, this is not a sort of playground where we exchange sound bites. So, Adele, can you explain the planning policy?
Thank you, Mayor. It's the first time we've had a suggestion like this put forward, and I think the officers need a bit of time to consider the potential. I guess what's what's behind that is can the council come forward with these policies sooner than we have scheduled? So in the consultation on our borough, our plan, the new local plan for steps, we indicate the next stage of consultation on the draft will be autumn of this year, and you're asking if the policy just in this area can come forward first. I think we'll need to have a chat with our legal colleagues. When it comes to local plan policies, there's nothing to stop a partial review of a local plan taking place, and that you could take segments and update that. I think the council's desire expressed by the mayor is that there's a need for a complete refresh of the local plan, and we've expressed that in the consultation document. And as part of that, we've said that all of the policies need to be considered together rather than separated out. So I think we need to take a legal view on whether the policies, if we did separate out and start something in advance, whether they will then be robust as we carry forward. And I think it's something we can look at in more detail, Mayor.
And if I could just be absolutely clear, and I'm sure Councillor Blake and Councillor Peck will come in a second. The reason I was very, very keen that this document come to the Cabinet is that it does provide a degree of clarity of what our existing policies are. And I was particularly struck by the flurry of applications in Whitechapel, which is currently a district centre and not a central activity zone, even though the Mayor of London may have created a prong, the previous Mayor of London may have created a prong to the city fringe OAPF, which might sort of smudge that and make the impression be created that you could have very tall buildings in Whitechapel. Whitechapel will become a different area with the Crossrail station, but that doesn't mean we can have large, massive buildings there. I was also struck by the fact that if you leave aside, and I do appreciate that a lot's happened on the South Quay area and the Isle of Dogs, which fundamentally has changed that area, and I don't necessarily disagree with everything you said on that. If you leave aside the Isle of Dogs and the city fringe, this is, relatively speaking, a low-rise borough, and the expectation that's being created in the development industry that you can go up and up and up and higher and higher and higher is one that I think we need to be very thoughtful about. And all the feedback I get from residents is that they don't really want that to happen in Tower Hamlets unless it's a very special reason or a very special place where it fulfills a particular purpose. And it seems to be the case that at the London Hospital, you build a London Hospital which is 23 floors high or whatever it is, and then that creates an expectation that everyone surrounding it can build something of the same height until the whole borough is covered in 23-storey buildings, and that's probably not what was intended. But I had Councillor Peck and then Councillor Blake.
So I just want to say, I mean, you asked Councillor Blake and I to look at the Whitechapel vision, this issue in particularly because at the very first mayoral assembly in Whitechapel, we heard from residents then that they felt the scale of development in Whitechapel was just starting to totally change the character of that area, which is, as you say, a pretty low-rise residential area, and that the number of tall buildings was starting to feel like their area was changing pretty fundamentally, and that the services weren't being able to keep up. That's a complaint we've had from the Isle of Dogs in the past, but I think, you know, whilst this document does reiterate what the existing policy is, the previous administration had moved on from this policy and had been much more permissive. So this is taking us back to something I think is really important, which is about that important piece of work Councillor Blake highlighted, which is about the suitability of tall buildings and what that height is in different areas. So that was a really important bit of work probably 5 or 6 years ago about town centres. So I think it's really important that we reiterate and that we send out a really clear message this evening to the development community that this policy is still in existence and we mean to apply it much more stringently than maybe previous administrations. Thank you.
Indeed. Do you want to add anything, Councillor Blake? Then we need to move on fairly quickly. But
Just to follow up, I mean, being described as a useful summary by Councillor Wood is, you know, praise indeed, which we'll definitely take away. But I think it's really important to emphasise that the local plan really is key here. Whether or not we do pursue, you know, an accelerated approach on tall buildings, I think we need to think about very carefully, because, you know, we've also got on the agenda some recommendations about housing affordability, which many people would feel to be crucial. Oh, you'd have those too? Yeah. Okay, right, okay. So, I mean, so there are lots of other issues that are close to many people's hearts that we would need to consider accelerating and balance up with resources. So I'd like to thank officers again for their input and recommend approval on this.
And I'm minded to agree the recommendations in the report, and I welcome Councillor Wood's comments, and we'll go away and look at that. But as Councillor Blake has said, life is one of the great joys of life is that opposition is great fun, and that's not meant to reduce the power of your position, but leading a council is a bit more challenging, as hopefully you will never find out, he said politically. But anyway, but okay, I don't mean that personally, you understand. But thank you very much. So we move on to item 5.2, which is substance misuse commissioning, and this has been subject to quite a lot of discussions outside the meeting. This is Councillor Sharia Khatun's report.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, we'll take 5.3, which is an exempt item at the same time. But as I said earlier, if people want to speak on 5.3, then we'll have to take it later on. Is that right? No, 5.3 is the non-exempt item. Right, let's get this right. So 5.2 and 5.3 are taken together. And then there is an exempt item at the end of the agenda, or as an addendum to this, which we can hopefully note in passing. But if people want to delve into it, we'll then have to adjourn the meeting, clear the gallery, or take it later on.
Thank you, Mayor. If I can actually, first of all, talk about paper 1, which outlines the competitive tender process that has been undertaken and recommendations for award. The 4 highest scoring bidders in each lot were invited to present. Recommendations for awards, highest scoring bids, are in the restricted papers, which you referred to just a little while ago. There were 3 lots. Lot 1 is for outreach referral, Lot 2 is for treatment services, and Lot 3 is for recovery support services. I don't really have much more to say on paper 1. There is some things I would like to mention on paper 2, if I may, Mr. Mayor. So paper 2, the recommendation to decommission the Harbour Recovery Centre due to poor performances, inappropriate model of treatment and poor value for money. Consultation on closure of harbour has been undertaken and responses are very mixed. Residents requiring inpatient treatment will still be able to access that intervention, but in a more cost-effective and clinically sound manner, leading to improved recovery outcomes. For noting, Mayor, the harbour has currently suspended services due to a vacancy in the clinical manager's post, and yesterday we've received confirmation that the Salvation Army, who's running the Harbour Recovery Centre, have decided to close the unit and will be announcing to their staff today. The other elements to report to is to continue procuring interventions at health, E1, GP practice for homeless hostel residents, and also to continue procuring specialist midwifery and specialist drug and alcohol nurses at the Royal London Hospital. All contracts for report 2 have been extended till the 30th of the 9th 16, with potential to extend but till 31st 12/16, but not beyond. Thank you.
Okay, and if there are any detailed questions, then we have Rachel, I can't pronounce, Sudig, right, who is the officer responsible for this. But are there any questions from members about this? So, yeah, Amy Whitelock-Gibbs.
Thanks, Mayor. I didn't have a question, as I've been involved in conversations with Councillor Khatun and officers about this from the health side, but I just wanted to add, having met some health colleagues earlier today as well, that the clinical side have been fully involved in developing the new model and really support the need to move towards this much more integrated and streamlined set of 3 lots, reducing the number of contracts but making sure the services are much more integrated and that they focus much more on treatment and recovery. And I suppose just to add as well, in relation to the Harbour Centre, that's in the same vein around recovery, that actually you can see from the paper that currently isn't actually helping many people to complete treatment. Lots of people re-present very quickly to the service, and it creates a bit of a cycle where they go in and out of the harbour. And I've actually heard people who've used the service talk about that anecdotally as well. And I think we should be much more ambitious for our vulnerable people who are addicted to drug and alcohol and trying to support them to recover, and that's what the new model is doing. So I support the proposals.
Okay, and I'm tempted to say a couple of things then, because I've been involved in a whole number of meetings and conversations about this. And 2 things were, first of all, on the harbour, my understanding is that there are a good range of treatment facilities, that the story on our drug treatment facilities and provision in the borough is quite a good one. Obviously, it's quite a difficult area of work, and so the closure of that facility will not lead to a particular loss of treatment capability for the community. I think that's the case. We've been advised repeatedly in meetings outside of the Cabinet that this is the case, and we cross-examined this whole process in great detail. And as Councillor Whitelock-Gibbs says, there's an overlap between Councillor Khatun's area and her area on this, and so we're very anxious that this is a good and comprehensive service. So that's the first bit. The second bit then is, as regards report 5.2, we have a confidential appendix which names the people who have been successful. Well, does it name them? Yes, it does name them, and there's a list of the bidders as well. And I can't reveal that to you because it's a confidential item. However, members across the council will have been, I think, lobbied across all the party groups about a particular project which was very anxious about its success or otherwise in the tendering for this service, which was historically known as the Bangladeshi Drugs Project and trades under the name of NAFAS. And I just wanted to record that they have done excellent work down the years, regardless of any of the political nuances of some of the work they do in a very political area. And they were an organisation that was founded at a time when there was tempted to call it an epidemic, but there was a severe problem on some of our toughest estates with heroin epidemic, if you like, and trading and widespread use. And the project NAFAS fulfilled a very, very important role at that time. and obviously, having agreed these decisions, that announcements have been made about the new tenderers, whoever they might be, and they may or may not include the old tenderers. And in the event that there are changes, and there will be changes, I'm sure, there will be the capability and experience of staff will still be used through the 2P process and through possibly other means as well. So I think I'm allowed to say that without getting into any legal difficulty. He said, looking at our head of law, probity and governance. So I'm happy to agree the recommendations on 5.2 and 5.3. Members happy with that? Yeah. If we move on to 5.4, we've got this is the Housing Policy and Affordability Commission. Again, it's Rachel Blake to speak on this item, and then we have a request from Tenants Federation of Tenants and Residents Associations to speak on it as well. And I know there's a leaflet that's been handed around at this meeting as well on this matter. Councillor Blake. So it's...
Thanks. I'd like to thank everybody that's been involved in this commission. We established an expert panel to hear evidence from both officers and local residents groups about the affordability crisis in Tower Hamlets, and I'd like to extend our thanks to them. I'd also like to extend thanks to the Tower Hamlets Federation of Residents and Tenants Associations who have participated and attended every session, and also Tower Hamlets renters who I don't think are here today but provided both written and verbal evidence at the session, and just to thank the Federation for their ongoing input and their subsequent written submission. We all know from our surgeries and from our own experiences that London faces a housing crisis, particularly caused by years of undersupply of homes. But in particular, we're conscious that in London in particular, there's an affordability crisis where households on average incomes, where two parents are working, would have to claim housing benefit for even a current so-called affordable rent set out in Tower Hamlets framework rents. Officers have done some really excellent work on understanding the impact of different levels of rents on households, and so I suggest to you a detailed read of page 147 onwards of the impact of different levels of rents on people's incomes. So not only are households who are working forced into claiming housing benefit at really quite comparatively low rent levels, but households who are affected by the total welfare benefit cap would be spending more than nearly half their income on their rent, where they are required to live in a framework rent property. In the course of the Affordability Commission, we concluded that the model of framework rents in Tower Hamlets was broken because incomes had not risen as fast as rent levels within the borough. Incomes and rent levels are no longer connected. We also noted that income levels do not vary across geographically across the borough in the way that rent levels. So incomes are are not affected so much by geography in the same way that rent levels are. So I could obviously go on for hours about the analysis, but it's quite a long agenda, so I probably would be shut off quite soon. But there's some really excellent work in here. The one other piece of evidence that I wanted to highlight to you is that shared ownership, the analysis of shared ownership sales that officers did, found that shared ownership was a very market-linked product. So shared ownership homes in our higher value areas generally were going to households who were buying higher proportions of the property and were generally on higher incomes, and I think that's important for us to reflect on when we go on to develop a low-cost home ownership option going forward. So, just moving on to the summary of recommendations that we want to make from the Commission. We believe that council-owned sites do need to deliver 100% rented accommodation, combining bringing back social target rents and introducing homes at a living rent, which I really am thrilled to see is suggested also in the Tower Hamlets Federation of TRAs, and I believe is also part of the new Mayor of London's manifesto. We will investigate letting those living rent homes through a separate waiting list and consider introducing a council-owned housing company. Again, a suggestion that has been brought forward by the Tower Hamlets Federation of Tenants and Residents Associations. This model would be may not be sustainable in the long term, given the level of intervention from the government on the housing revenue account. So we do need to keep in check our long-term approach to this. Regarding our Section 106 sites, we need to explore the option of reducing the borough framework rents to social target rent levels, taking into account the impact on viability, so reintroducing social target rents on Section 106 sites. We have to also be conscious of the government's housing and planning bill, which plans to make a requirement for us to provide starter homes, and so we'll be keeping a close eye on that. Given the changes to the housing market and land values, we should also review our policy regarding commuted sums for affordable housing, with specific reference to creating mixed and sustainable communities and considering the overall output of affordable housing. There are other recommendations to be taken forward, which will be taken forward through our housing strategy, so I look forward to working with colleagues on bringing those forward.
Can I thank our officers and as Rachel said, the witnesses who helped and the panel members who helped to put this together. I found it an extremely useful piece of work. Obviously, it doesn't fundamentally change the funding position or government policy, and the situation will continue to be very difficult. But I certainly am happy to commend the recommendations. Now, Mark Taylor has become Jenny Fisher, who is here to speak on behalf of the Federation of Tenants and Residents Associations for, I think it's up to 5 minutes, is that right? Up to 3 minutes. Okay, I'll start. So Jenny, you're very welcome to speak for up to 3 minutes.
The Federation of Tenants and Residents Associations is a non-party political body. We represent tenants and residents of all political parties and none. On the other hand, of course, we do recognise that government policy dictates a lot of what's happening in housing, and local, regional and local bodies' responses are important as well. Sometimes politics can come into this. But at the moment we feel that housing is being treated like a political football, and tenants in particular are a political football. And we're looking for a mayor who will stand up for us and make it clear that tenants remain at the heart of the administration's agenda. We do wish to pay tribute to the officers who have done such an excellent and informed and knowledgeable job of producing most of the background papers in this. But the recommendations, John, must be yours, and as such we are disappointed in some respects. We are disappointed that you have not taken on board and we invite you to reconsider adding some of our missed recommendations into your programme. We are disappointed that you've not agreed to identify housing need. We felt at the Commission, which we attended, there was far too much emphasis on what can we do housing-wide, how can we how can we limit housing, restrict it, how can we identify those who are most in need. And this hierarchy of need, we feel, is not really very beneficial to tenants or to housing, and we would like some transparency in this council of a statement of housing need, not just a list of who's on the waiting list, that we can use to show how overarching government policy or whatever is limiting and is making people in housing need remain in housing need for much longer than is necessary. We welcome the emphasis on lower rents, but that has to go hand in hand with an agreement to identify more and more units that can actually be occupied, including by building units, because otherwise the emphasis on lower rents, if it limits the number of homes, and we believe by returning some of the GLA money offered for previous developments it could do, there's a danger of saying to people, we can't house you because we can't build enough units at really affordable rents, i.e. affordable at what people can afford to pay. Instead, we fulfil our statutory duty to house you by sending you off to the private sector where you pay 100% of market rents. So we're looking for a firefighting exercise that's going to house as many people as possible in the hope that the affordability criteria will be very much changed within a very short number of years.
I don't recognise any of that, but your 3 minutes is up in 4 seconds.
So we invite you to consider these proposals that we have made. We invite you to reconsider them, particularly the ones where we felt all along, not least because we were not included on the Affordability Commission, the expertise of residents has been overlooked and reduced to bit part players or noises off.
Right.
And we invite you to adopt our proposals at the end.
Thank you very much.
About redressing this democratic deficit.
Well, we've received this, and I'm happy to agree the recommendations written on the report. I don't recognise what you say about failure to identify. Could you if you press the red button, that'd be ever so helpful, because otherwise it screws up the recording mechanism, which is primitive, Stone Age recording equipment we inherited from the previous mayor. And I'm pretty clear that we do identify housing need. I'm pretty clear that we're going to make an announcement very soon about the expenditure of Section 106 and of retain right to buy receipts. I'm pretty clear we're going to have a programme of over 1,000 council homes which will be built at rents which will be close to or at social rents. The framework is quite difficult to make it exactly the case. I'm pretty clear also that we have delved further into the issue of affordable housing than any previous mayor has done, and it's been a scandal that we've built stuff and boasted that it's affordable when it's not. So I'm pretty clear about all of that stuff. We have to work within government policy, short of a revolution, which is outside of my capabilities. And I'm pretty clear, as yet, I'm looking for revolutionary capabilities, but I'm pretty clear that we're going to be very strident in our communications, in our making the case on behalf of the very needy people of Tower Hamlets. And the overwhelming need is for people who cannot afford to live in our borough. And the market has created a situation in which they are not just, but they are predominantly people on very low incomes and people who are generally dependent on housing benefit to help pay their housing costs. They also include quite a lot of key workers and people who provide essential roles who can no longer afford to live in our borough. We can't reverse that absolutely, but we need to have a mixture of policies that will help address that, which is predominantly about creating more and more social rented properties, in my opinion. So I'm pretty clear about that, and I'd agree the recommendations in the report. Do you want to add anything, Councillor Blake? Mindful of the fact we have to be somewhere else in 39 minutes.
I think the answer is no.
Can I thank you very much, Jenny? And as always, it's a joy to have your praise. Thank you. If we can move on then to item, and we're happy to have more public meetings, as was said earlier. Councillor Pearce talked about mayoral assemblies, and I'm happy to come and meet the Federation. I know that my 2 cabinet members on housing meet the Federation every month, and will continue to do so. And this is an ongoing challenge. No one said it was fun, but I think we can build quite a lot of more affordable housing, and I'm very, very focused on trying to do that. We move on to item 5.5, which is the Hostels Commissioning Plan, and the lead member for this is Councillor Amy Whitelock-Gibbs, and Karen Sugars can present, perhaps, if she's here. Is she here? She is. There we go. But Amy.
Thank you, Mayor. Hostels form a really vital part of our services for people who, with many vulnerabilities and who are homeless. And we need a new hostels commissioning plan because the contracts and the current plan are due to expire this year. The paper in front of us all has a review of the current provision for hostels and some high-level proposals for redesign and reshaping of those hostels. And the recommendations are asking, Mayor, for your approval of these high-level plans, which would then be subject to engagement and discussion with service users, providers, landlords and other relevant stakeholders before finalising the final designs of the hostels. Just very briefly wanted to touch on what the drivers for the proposals are. Firstly, the financial pressures that we face as a council, and particularly within the Adults Directorate, and one of the savings targets for 2016-17 includes a range of commissioned services, of which hostels is one. Secondly, the review of services has shown that we could match the current hostels better to the need that we're seeing in the borough. And thirdly, some of the hostels, as members will be aware, are outdated, and this is an opportunity to make them fit for purpose. The key changes are set out on page 212. And essentially these are to focus more on those with more complex needs, to make sure that there's a range of provision for those people, to reduce beds for women and those with abstinent needs based on the analysis of referrals and needs in the borough, and to reduce the overall beds by approximately 120 units. This is in reflection of new move-on services that we have in the borough now to support people to move into other accommodation which is more appropriate than a hostel when they're ready. Lower referrals from some groups that I've alluded to, and also the savings needs that I've referred to. There's lots of detail in the paper that I won't go into, and essentially this is just to ask for your high-level approval so that we can go out and engage more with service users and providers to finalise the proposals for the final plan.
Carol, any questions or additions to that? I find it frustrating that our hostel operators aren't able to consult more speedily with their residents, because I think they know roughly what they want to do, and they need to work out with their client group how they should best do that. But anyway, I think this is probably a necessary and welcome report, and it does seamlessly fit into an earlier report on substance use, doesn't it, in terms of provision of facilities, and will enable us to improve provision in a part of the river that will be a part of the borough that will be beneficial to a particular client group, I think. I'm happy to agree with the recommendations if there aren't any further questions. Is that all right? Thank you very much. Thanks for your work on this. If anyone wants to go home, now they can. 5.6, apart from the Chief Exec, Children Look After Strategy. Rachel.
Yeah, so this is a strategy that wouldn't always come to Cabinet for decision, but you decided that it would because our Children Looked After strategy and indeed our Looked After children are hugely important to us, and a big part of all of our roles is our corporate parenting responsibilities. So this strategy describes our responsibilities, lines of accountability, priorities and objectives for the next 3 years, as well as how we intend to achieve them. So you asked to note that and the action plan. Its delivery will be overseen by the Tower Hamlets Corporate Parenting Steering Group, which has itself been through something of a period of change since your election, my becoming lead member. I think it's probably the single most useful thing that I do, chairing that group, because the outcomes are really important and also really tangible. So we have 4 meetings a year. We've decided to theme those meetings to focus on particular aspects of our service to and support for looked after children and children who are leaving care. We have increased its membership, so Councillor Whitelock goes was at the last meeting. We have a foster parent on it and have asked officers to invite an additional foster carer, so we hopefully will have 2 foster carers participating, which is a really valuable perspective. And we have young people involved as well. So we've had small numbers, kind of 2 or 3 young people coming to meetings so far, and we've asked the Children and Care Council to nominate others. And Councillor Agger and I were at an awards ceremony for education attainment for looked after children recently, and many young people were coming to us and talking to us about coming onto our corporate parenting steering group, which is really exciting. So it's something that they've really taken on and taken responsibility for. So the plan sets out our what we intend to do over the next 3 years. One of our key priorities, I think, is educational attainment, which isn't currently good enough. We've made a recent appointment to the head teacher of the virtual school, and we have support as well from some from Haringey, which has much better educational outcome than we do, to help us think through how we improve those outcomes, which will hopefully then also enable us to improve jobs outcomes and create a much brighter future for the young people in our care. So grateful for the time from colleagues to consider this at Cabinet, and grateful to you all for working with us and the Corporate Parenting Steering Group to do the best job we can for looked after children that we're responsible for.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And does anybody want to come in on this? I know a lot of Cabinet members take a particularly keen interest in this subject, and corporately, corporate parenting is one of the most, as Rachel said, one of the most important things that we do. And we should continue to be frustrated and dissatisfied at the outcomes for too many of our looked after children. Obviously, looked after children will tend to come from more challenging backgrounds by definition. But yeah, we need to do better. and we will do. Councillor Amy Whitelock-Gibbs.
Thanks, Mayor. I just wanted to let the rest of Cabinet know that we've discussed briefly looking at transitions between children and adult services for some of these young people, and it came up at the last corporate parenting group, and it's come up at MAB discussions before. So I just wanted to let people know that we will be actively looking at that issue across our directorates to try and join that up a bit more effectively.
Yeah, and I welcome that. And I suppose I should, just reflecting what I've just said, because we're in the business where you tend to focus on the bits that aren't working well, we should celebrate the fact that a lot of what we do is working quite well as well, of course. But if we look at outturns, education outturns and so on for looked after children, then they clearly need to be better. And as I said, the plan is about us focusing and being quite public about focusing on our need to do that. Is everyone happy with where we are on this? Okay, so onwards, and I'm happy to agree the recommendations set out in the report. We move on now to, and thanks for all the work on that from our officers. We move on to 5.7, which is the education partnership. And could we invite Kat Smith and Kate Bingham to approach the table if they can add some value to this, I think. Did you want to speak on this, Mr. Gold, as well? You didn't have to. You don't have to. It's not compulsory. Okay. Well, you may want to take both again. Okay. In fact, yes. It's just been suggested to me, voices left, that I should take 5.7 and 5.8 together. And that may make sense. And shall I ask Rachel Saunders to introduce the reports? If you think they should be done separately, then do it separately. But
so 5.8 essentially gives our response to the legislative context, which is changing all the time, and we heard recently from the Secretary of State that she's not in fact going to force schools to academise, which gives a slightly different context. But there was a recent piece of legislation that was passed. There was then another white paper, and the context is shifting rapidly. But so 5.8 gives you the best up-to-date picture of where we are in relation to the DfE schools white paper, education excellence everywhere, and the DfE consultation on the national funding formula. So as well as noting the implications for the council, I think we would note that we are doing all we can and will do more to lobby on schools funding, because Tower Hamlets school results are exceptional, our schools are exceptional. Part of the reason for that is that we're well funded to tackle the deprivation and the impacts of poverty that our schools are so brilliant at surmounting in very many ways. So as well as being quite a complex set of policy kind of shifting sands, funding is something very straightforward that we need to and will do more to campaign on very powerfully. So that's 5.8, which I think gives context to 5.7, which Cass Smith will say something about in a minute. But what I want to say is that this is a partnership which has been set up led by schools. We've done what we can to support that conversation and to make it work and to make it happen, because I think we have enormous confidence that our school leaders, both head teachers, governors, parents, know our communities well and are partners with us in delivering the best possible education for children and young people in Tower Hamlets. And the cooperation and collaboration between schools and the relationship that schools have with their local communities is hugely powerful and something that we want to do all we can to support and develop. So the proposed Tower Hamlets Education Partnership is a schools-led partnership to accelerate the existing extraordinary kind of Tower Hamlets education achievement journey between schools themselves, that collaboration between schools and the authority and other partners. The main thing that this report asks you to do is to allocate some funding to supporting that partnership. We met the commissioners this afternoon. The DCLG commissioners will have to actually make the decision about making that, because it's effectively a grant. It's the amount of money that we propose is given to the partnership, and in our dialogue with them, both we and they were very clear that we're not proposing kind of 3 years of funding, no strings attached. There's an aspect of funding the organisation in order to allow it to set up and to appoint somebody to run it. But any funding in years 2 or 3, hopefully you'll be making a decision by then without commissioners, but whether it's you or commissioners or anybody else, that future funding will obviously be dependent on a business plan and set of objectives and key measurables and so on. But we have, I think, what it's fair to describe as a kind of reasonable, in principle, support from the commissioners that this seems like a good idea and a good thing for the borough to be doing, and assuming that we're able to draft an appropriate report, that they, I hope, will support the funding being granted that you have allocated. So, but I'll pass to Kath if that's all right for her to say something more about the partnership and its purpose and its journey to date.
This is when it's my annual moment of embarrassment, isn't it? No, I've known Kath Smith for longer than anyone else I've known in this room, because we met on the gates of Molam School when both of our kids, who are now 25 years old, you had twins, I think, started to attend the Teachers' Workplace Nursery. That was a long time ago, wasn't it? So you wouldn't think that Kath was that old, although you probably would think that I was that old. So Kath, who's now the head of Bow School.
Thank you, and this marks the end of 30 years since I started working in education in Tower Hamlets. So, I think you've painted a lot of the picture, but I suppose just a reminder, really, that the journey that Tower Hamlets has been on in education has been a phenomenal one, and the report that Husbands and Woods et al. Wrote a couple of years ago very much indicated that the key driver behind the success of Tower Hamlets was the partnership, the collaboration between schools and the local authority, and that the leadership from the council was very much a key driver in raising standards. And I think we've risen standards are fantastic in Tower Hamlets schools, but there is still a journey to go on. And just over a year ago, I think head teachers began to realise that although we'd had a fairly robust way of ignoring what was going on outside of Tower Hamlets, and academisation hadn't really hit us, that it really was on the cards. And even then there were mutterings around forced academisation, and over a period of time, of course, that picture still exists. There's still the risk of forcing schools that requires improvement or special measures to academise. There's still the risk of schools that are coasting being forced to academise, and obviously, the funding situation also puts everything at risk. So it isn't a stable situation, and the story behind collaboration is one that I think we absolutely have to hang on to. And the fear, and I think I will use fear, the fear that some of us had was that as schools gradually move to become academies, that they will move away from that family of schools that we've got. And I think I also got to the point with others that we felt that we couldn't stop the academisation happening. It was going to happen. Governors were going to make those decisions, and it wasn't going to happen perhaps as rapidly as it has elsewhere, but it was beginning to happen in Tower Hamlets, and we were beginning to get that fear that the fragmentation of schools in Tower Hamlets could just lead us to lose that family of schools, that local knowledge, the power of collaboration and partnership that has driven standards as far as they are to date. And so this partnership has grown out of a desire to keep the schools together, to stop the fragmentation, to give us a kind of glue in Tower Hamlets which will help us to continue to drive school improvement forward, even when schools become academies or cluster into multi-academy trusts or something, that there remains something which we all drive forward, which is around our local knowledge, our knowledge of what works best for Tower Hamlets children, how we can drive standards up, how we can still continue to work together to forge great economies of scale, and ultimately to just have school improvement as such a key driver, not just for the schools that are perhaps going into difficulty, but also to keep driving schools getting better and better. And to recognise, if you look at the history of any school in Tower Hamlets, most of them over time have been on a cycle. Very few schools have actually managed to remain solidly fantastic all of the time. Things change, staffing changes, situations change, and schools are vulnerable. And we believe that by hanging together in a partnership there really is a strong future for the children of Tower Hamlets to continue to be in an improving situation. But those things don't happen easily, and we do need this transition period in order to set up this entity and to grow it from what we're starting off is really quite small, just to focus on school improvement, and then the hope would be that this could go from strength to strength and become, put Tower Hamlets right in there on the map of a fantastic voice for education, a place of innovation, research and development, and of course a place where wouldn't it be lovely if people were moving to Tower Hamlets to get the education for their children? But let's serve the children we've got first of all. And I think this is the way forward. At a time when there's so much instability in education, this partnership could really provide us with something that gives us a robust kind of response to what's going on outside.
Okay, are there any questions from members? Josh Peck.
Thank you. I agree with all of what you've both said. I think our schools in the borough are fantastic. I think they deserve a lot of congratulations and they deserve a lot of support. And I think the continuance of this method of kind of working collectively to improve standards, to support other schools in driving up standards kind of collectively is really important. I could talk about that for a long time. I'm going to talk about a concern that doesn't undermine the kind of the strength of my support for this. But I am concerned when I look at. So you talked about the partnership between schools and councils. I think the third part of that is the partnership with parents, which is really important. And I'm really concerned when I look at the steering group membership and the interim board membership at how unrepresentative those bodies are. I think it is deeply, deeply shocking that a steering group membership of 22 people has not a single Bengali name on it, as far as I can see, and that the interim board effectively is 6 men and 1 woman. I think it is really troubling that better effort has not been made to better reflect the parents and the students of this borough that are in large part from not just from white backgrounds, and that I would expect. I've got a 4-year-old daughter. I am constantly appalled by the glass ceilings already crowding in on her. I would expect our schools to be absolutely the places that challenge that from day one, and I think to have a schools partnership that has only 9 women of 22 and only 1 woman of 6 on the board is really, really troubling. And so I really support the overall objective, but I think there is a very, very worrying lack of diversity in the kind of old boys club that seems to have put this together.
Would you like to address that?
There's 2 things really. One is that the steering group was formed from people who volunteered to be put forward to it. So it was out to all the head teachers, all the governors, and so we took the people who felt they had the time at that moment to try and put a huge amount of time behind that, in addition to their jobs within schools. So I think that probably restricted some of the choice of people. It's certainly been noted. And I would look to move beyond the interim board as quickly as possible in order to get exactly what you're saying, which is a properly representative group of people. The interim board and where we are now is about trying to get things done really quickly. And certainly my desire would be to move very quickly into appointing the people who will take this forward properly. But we need an interim position, and these are the people who are there at the moment. I take your point completely, and we're looking for people who can step up to the mark and do this thing permanently, and who do represent the community in a much better way.
Well, you said invitations were sent for people who volunteered. Did it include primary school teachers and deputy head teachers as well?
Yes, it was to all head teachers, and when I'm talking about all head teachers, I'm here representing primary, nursery, special and secondary. So it absolutely went out, and we had a quota on the steering committee, so I can't remember the numbers, but there were X number that represented primary, X that secondary, nursery and special school were all there on that. And then the governors, we put a plea out to all governors, and those are the people. So we had 1 parent governor within that. But, I think it was possibly the short notice and the desire to have people who really could put quite a considerable amount of time into it at that point.
The reason I say when Councillor Peck talked about diversity and reflect the community, I mean, we have, I think there's one Bangladeshi head teacher at Bigler Green School, number of deputy head teachers, one in Swanley School as well, and whether they could be encouraged perhaps to come forward and take part on the board.
I think that individual was approached and had reasons why it wasn't possible.
Okay, other questions, observations?
Can I just make one summary point, which is that one of the things I think it's really positive to have this conversation with Kath here, because we've talked about it, you know, in different forums, but to have Kath around the table as a part of the dialogue is really useful. One of the things I've personally been particularly, there's a kind of a judgment make as a cabinet member as to where you can actually contribute something useful in this kind of conversation, and I think something where I have tried to contribute something useful is thinking about what governance looks like in the future. So there is huge goodwill now, and the personal relationships are very strong now, which means that there is absolute confidence that there will be an excellent partnership and we'll work together and collaborate, and, you know, this type of conversation and constructive challenge can continue, but you can't rely on personal relationships existing forever, and you have to create mechanisms to try and make sure that they continue to exist. So part of what it says in this paper is that there'll be a subcommittee to the Children and Families Partnership, which ensures that it looks like responsibilities that the authority will certainly have into the future of school places and SEN. Where our other current statutory responsibilities go is, you know, for debate and for Parliament to decide, but we will have some responsibilities. This partnership will, we all hope, take on other responsibilities. So making sure that we continue to deliver all of those responsibilities to our children and young people together, rather than kind of saying, so this is my job and this is your job, is really important. So that partnership working together, I think, is hugely important, as well as working with Councillor Pearson and over in scrutiny to make sure that, you know, you're not going to be able to just kind of ask a local authority officer what's happening with schools necessarily in the future, but hopefully the partnership will be a mechanism for that democratic scrutiny to happen as well. So making sure that we're well set up to continue existing relationships in a slightly more formal way into the future, I think, is also really important.
Well, I welcome that as well, and maybe I should tub thump more often, but I'm very enthusiastic about this, and one of my first meetings as mayor was with Kath, and indeed one of my most important meetings before I became mayor was with a number of other education worthies, not that Kath's are worthy, not yet, a number of education worthies, and who mooted this idea, and I think Rachel and I both spoke at a meeting of head teachers last week, and there was a very good turnout of heads, and I know that at governors' meetings there have been pretty vigorous turnouts as well, and there's a lot of anxiety but also support for maintaining the collective and collaborative ethos, which has helped to sustain improvement in our schools, and so we need to try and keep that together. And regardless of what Parliament does, people will consider that we have a civic role in providing some leadership for education in our borough. And indeed, I mean, I might as well state very clearly that in my view it's ridiculous to remove so much responsibility from democratic accountability for education. That doesn't mean we want to run every school, because I think the system of local management has been quite effective in many ways, but we need to make sure that the community feels a strong sense of ownership and an ability to influence and be heard by and work with the school's partnership. So I guess, although legally we won't be part of this partnership, we'll have an observer status. We want to make sure that we have a strong and enduring relationship with it, and I'm taking your assurance that that will be the case, and we'll be looking as things unfold at ways in which we can make sure that that is maintained and strengthened, both through the role of the mayor, through the lead member, through our statutory residual responsibilities, and so on. Do you want to respond to that at all, Kath?
I think it's important for us to log, and I really welcome everything that you've said, Mayor, but actually we will continue to have a role in relation to education. We'll continue to provide an important role in relation to, alongside the partnership, and I think that it is probably fair to say that observer status of itself does not do it. And I think, as Councillor Saunders has outlined in relation to the proposed governance arrangements, that reflects the importance and the continuing importance of the partnership as it evolves to where we are at.
Indeed. And clearly we still have a duty to stand up for our community in a whole number of ways, and I look forward to a strong continuing relationship. Can I agree the recommendations in front of us, and we note in particular the comments that Councillor Saunders made about our earlier conversation with the Commissioners about ensuring that we have a solid business plan and board competencies, and we can note also the comments made by Councillor Peck about representativeness and by others. We happy to move on? Yep. Should we move on to 510? Thank you very much, Kath. To Public Health Grant 2016-17? 5.9, yes, sorry, I'm jumping ahead of my... In 2016 to 19 Children and Families Plan, which is, again, for Councillor Saunders.
Yeah, so we no longer have to have this plan by statute, but the Children and Families Partnership has chosen to continue to meet and to continue to commit to be committed to working together. So approval is sought now for the Children and Families Plan for the next 3 years. It's the partnership plan, and different organisations in the borough will continue to have their own plans and to set out their own responsibilities, but the Children and Families Plan sets out our collective vision. It's been developed by the partnership, which includes local agencies, health, police, RSLs, schools and the voluntary sector. It supersedes the 2012-15 Children and Families Plan, so there's a bit of a gap under your predecessor who kind of let this drift somewhat. But it's one of our key strategies, which means that in all that we choose to do for children and young people, we choose to work together in doing it. And I think the direction of travel in terms of schools that you've heard described makes it all the more clear how important it is that we have structures and collective plans that hold us together and give us a sense of common purpose. So it was the methodology was through a needs assessment and also through using a child rights based approach, which was an interesting challenge just to think slightly differently to how we have done before, putting a child's voice at the centre of our thinking on this. So there's a lot of detail in here which I'm happy to speak to, but yeah, it's a comprehensive plan which sets out how we... there are some task and finish groups to take forward particular tasks and priorities. Actually, a lot of it is work that's being done by different groups and organisations across the council and partners more broadly. So some of this is about restating, a vision which isn't necessarily radically new, but restating our shared sense of purpose and priority, and mapping out where there are existing groups and organisations that can deliver on those priorities.
Any questions, observations? No, I'm happy to agree. I think essentially that we note this plan and that it's been put together by the partnership, which continues to coordinate and oversee our services for children and families. Is that all right? Okay, thank you. So we move on to 510, Public Health Grant and Savings Proposals. And this is Councillor Amy Whitelock-Gibbs' report.
Thanks, Mayor. As I have mentioned in previous cabinets and during the main budget process, we knew that as part of its austerity drive, the government were going to make significant cuts to the public health grant, and that's affecting councils up and down the country. The announcement of the amounts was delayed, which is why these savings are out of sync with the normal budget processes the council has been operating. To summarise, we need to find £5 million this financial year. That's because of a combination of pressures. So in 2015-16, the Chancellor announced an in-year cut very late in the year, which was around 2.2 million. For 16-17, the allocation includes a cut of 3.1 million, and we know there are pressures particularly in the sexual health budgets and in relation to free school meals, which we fund through public health as well. It's worth noting that the analysis from the Local Government Association has shown London councils have been hit particularly hard by the public health cuts from government, which is worrying given we have some of the poorest communities and the most difficult and entrenched health inequalities. So we've looked very carefully at what savings we can make, and this paper includes the first set of proposals to be consulted on. So it's a total of 2.3 million that has been identified, and the paper seeks your approval to go out to consultation on these proposals. A few kind of bits of the paper to highlight. Page 419 sets out the current spend for the whole of the public health grant, including services that aren't subject to savings proposals at the moment. Pages 420 onwards set out the savings needed and why the amount of 5 million is required this year. And section 6 goes into detail about the methodology that officers have used to identify these possible savings. In particular, I draw your attention to 6.5, which sets out the criteria that were used to review all of the services that we currently fund through the public health grant. The headlines really are that there are a number of mandatory services that we need to protect, that the grant is that we're kind of required to fund, such as sexual health testing and treatment, and a number of other things which are listed in the paper. We've also proposed to preserve as much of the early years investment as possible, because we know from our own services and from a lot of evidence that making sure children have the best start in life and making sure that mums in the prenatal and postnatal period are supported is really helpful for later health outcomes. And we're also looking to reshape or target services as far as possible. So that's where some of the proposals around smoking and sexual health services come in. You know, there's no way of avoiding that these are difficult decisions for us to consider, which is why we are doing a full consultation, and section 9 sets out the groups that we'll be consulting, including service users, providers, other community groups, and we've arranged to go to ONS, whether or not Councillor Pearce is still the chair or not, but if he is, then we will come to ONS and be grilled by him and his colleagues, no doubt, on the detail. Pages 427 to 456 set out the detailed proposals, and each of these pro formas will be published as part of the consultation to enable the public and others to comment on any concerns or other proposals they have. And the proposal is that the consultation would start on Monday. And just, I guess, to add that we've obviously only identified just under half of the savings required so far, and currently work is ongoing to identify how we will deal with the rest of the gap. But we felt it was important to go to consult on these savings, because the longer we delay making savings, the more savings we will have to find in the future.
I think I'm right in saying that the savings presented in this report sort of consolidate the savings required from us last year, which were at that time covered by reserves. So will there be any reserves at the end of this year for future resilience?
So the public health grant, the way it works is that if there are underspends in areas, they would then become the reserves. And we're currently looking at the moment at whether there will be any underspends that we can carry forward to help with the current savings pressures.
Okay, thanks very much. This is the beginning of possibly a fairly lengthy sequence of challenging decisions, because not only do we have to balance our budget and achieve savings this year, but we need to make a number of decisions which my illustrious predecessor failed to make about restructuring the authority to meet its diminished resources. So there we are.
Probably just note on the penultimate line on page 12, I think inadvertently suggests a 631% reduction. I think it means 31%, just so we don't
631%.
do something really weird with the budget.
Well, okay.
I just thought it was important.
I don't know. 600. Yes. Okay. On balance, I think we can agree that. I'm happy to agree the recommendations set out in the report, and thanks very much. Did you need to speak on this, Rachel?
I just want to say briefly that some of it is obviously relevant to children's public health, and that following discussion with Councillor Gibbs and with the Director of Public Health, it's really positive to see the evidence-based approach to making sure that the services which we're keeping are the ones which are about the earliest possible intervention in children's lives, because that's where we can have the most impact and make the most difference.
Okay, I'm very grateful for that. That's a mantra I've heard about 5 times today, not just from you, Councillor Saunders. I'm not picking on you. And I think we need to be careful before we get carried away with a mantra which overrules all others. But nevertheless, the evidence is fairly strong about early year intervention. But there are, I think we had an intervention earlier in the meeting today from somewhat older year residents who might consider that they need to be taken into account as well. So we need to obviously keep a balance in what we're thinking about. But I'm happy, as I said previously, to agree the recommendations. I'm very grateful for your comments, Councillor Saunders. 5.11 is corporate directors' decisions, and as always, there's a massive number of these. Usually one. Is it one? Two. So we're hurtling towards double figures if you use the binary notation, and they are Children's Services and Resources. Are there any comments members need to raise on these? No, I'm happy to note these or agree the recommendation. And the second thing then is list of individual executive mayoral decisions at 5.12, and I try to keep these to a reasonably low number. And there are 2. And are there any questions on any of these? Are we happy to note the report and agree the recommendations? Yep, well I am, yes. So in that case, I don't have to exclude, there's no other unrestricted business. I don't have to exclude the present public because I don't think members want to discuss the pink item in confidential session. Nope. In which case I can declare the meeting closed, and thank you very much.